So I'm here with Steve Finnan, who's one of my co-hosts in the Pass It On podcast, and behind the camera is young Miss Connie Fleming, who's the host of the podcast. But the reason I'm taking this time to record the quick video is when we were up in the archives of DC Thomson looking at the original Pass It On tips written in by housewives in the 1950s to the Sunday Post, we found there the in the bound copies, bound volumes of the Sunday Post, we found a thing I'd never seen before, which is that on the Sunday Post, and the back page, back in the 50s and in the 60s, there would be a late breaking news cutout. So there would be printed in red type, as you can see here, a selection of late breaking news. And it was quite an innovative thing to do, and I don't really know how they did it. So, Steve.
I can explain exactly how I did it because I worked on it. When late news came in, we would create a curved plate to bolt onto the presses, but we would then cut a squarish shape out the end of that, and to replace the plate we would put in slugs straight from a linotype into a curved chase which would contain the late breaking news. An awful lot of the time when I worked for an evening newspaper, these were race results, although genuinely they would be late breaking news.
So how would you get from the chase, which is something like this?
Yes.
So if I pick this up, obviously it's very heavy. It looks like that. So that is a collection of lines of type, of slugs of type, set in hot metal, which are then bolted into this frame, this chase. How would you get from the chases into that single metal plate?
Right. We would pass these along to the stereotypers, who we, with little respect, we called them the washers, bashers and squashers, because they washed the type with petrol when one of these chases. Then they would batter it all down so it was all definitely smooth, and then they would put a sort of, I'm not entirely sure exactly what it was made of. We called it a mat, but it was a fireproof piece of paper. Then they would squash that down on top of the chase with an awful lot of pressure. It was done by a machine, and what would come out would be a piece of cardboard that was able to be bent into a metal cast. We would then pour molten lead into that, and it would set really quite quickly because it was cold metal that it was going on to, which would give us a cast of a curved metal plate.
And I know from talking to my friend Glenn Fleischman, who's in the middle of creating a series of tiny museums of type history, he would call that mat a flong, F-L-O-N-G.
Yeah, as did we, to be honest. We called them flongs too, although we Caseroom boys tended to totally disrespect what the washers, bashers and squashers were doing and just called them metal monkeys because that's all they did. But
so you'd get the linotype machines, these huge big things with basically a typewriter at the heart of them, but they would gather together lines of typeset by the typesetters. Those would then be put into chases. That would then have what was in effect a kind of paper mache put over the top of them, squashed down under pressure. Yeah. That would then be cast in metal again. And weirdly, because of the sort of reverse, the flongs were the right way around.
Flongs were the right way around, yeah.
And then you poured hot metal into that. But then what you did was you cut a section, cut section out of that.
But we circumvented the stereo, the making of the flong, and we would take the news straight from the newsroom down to the press room where the linotype was ensconced, and we would, while they're making the flong, casting the plate, bringing it down, bolting on, that gives us 10 to 15 minutes to put the latest breaking news into this, and a linotype operator would be expected to fire out a slug every 10 seconds or so. And
we're talking, it was molten metal.
Molten lead.
So a great big vat of molten lead.
Yes.
And as the linotype operator is pressing the keys, that is concatenating molds into which that hot metal would then be flowed in a line to consolidate in a single metal strip, like the one you have there, a slug.
It is, yeah. A linotype is possibly the most complicated piece of machinery that I have ever seen close up. There is no evolution of a linotype. It had to be somebody imagined what the problem was, what needed to be done, and made that very complicated machine with all its matrices and all its working bits with the hot lead, married the two together, and then came up with this idea. And it is basically a machine that takes matrices of type,
negative spaces in effect, negative shapes.
Yes, and puts them arranges them in his composing line, and then
And by
casts
the way,
a line
they
from it.
weren't QWERTY, were they, the keyboards?
No, they were Etuan keyboards. It's arranged strictly because your ETAOIN are the most used, the 6 most used letters of the alphabet.
And then back in the day when you were doing hand compositing, if you talk about uppercase and lowercase letters, that was literally a slide-out case of type with letters in it. And I'm right in thinking, aren't I, that those ETIONN were at the centre of that?
No, the ETAIOIN is your lowercase letters are on your left. Your uppercase letters are in the middle. It's a 60 character. No, it's a 72
you're talking about linotype at this point.
Linotype,
I'm talking about
yes.
when it was actually cases of physical, manually assembled
No, they were
letter forms.
A to Z.
Were they? Okay.
They were A to Z with special characters, colons, for instance, long dashes down at the end, which we called the lower line. And these were in wooden trays, specially formulated for the pieces of metal. And we cast those with machines. Certainly in the case room I worked in, the machine was called a Ludlow. And small apprentices like myself would sometimes...
You're still small, Steve.
I am. True. But sometimes by mistake we would put the chase into the machine the wrong way, which meant it didn't have a backstop on it, and it would spit, as we called it, which was fire a jet of hot metal at your stomach.
So, I've interrupted you so many times. So we've got at the stage now where we've created the flong, we've cast that in metal,
Yes.
Which is curved to go onto the drums of the printer.
Bolted to the drums of the printer, yes.
Yeah, which is just spinning around, and there's a continuous web feed, it's called, continuous stream of paper going past. This is turning. What do you then do with this little handful that you have in your hands?
You have to literally stop the press because you can't do this while it's moving. So you ask the print room overseer, you shout, stop press ready, you get in there and you are dealing with you wear a glove because you can't get this in enough. You can't get this in while it's cold enough. So you're wearing a glove, you bolt this, you've made a slightly curved to the same curvature as the plate. You have made this curved chase which has slots in it that you put in these lines of type, and then you insert them onto the drum. And that will have there's a very, very clever individual roller that will make the rest of the paper black, but only this little corner is, there's nothing else on that line. You'll remember newspapers used to have a bit of a blank space. That's because it left space for a red roller, and the stop press section would be printed in red. You could make it black, but you had to tell the print officer, the print room manager, gaffer, as we called them, that you wanted black, but that was way further back in the setup.
So the time you're producing this is between the editor signing off on all the pages, which I'm presuming would be done kind of in a single block. There'd be a sort of final, this is all done now stage.
No, you had to have a steady flow of pages to the plate makers who had to have time to work, and therefore the flanges had to be made and they had to have time to work. So there had to be a steady flow of pages going out all the time, and the what we called the stone the sub-editor who worked on the stone would be in charge of time. The stone was largely the big metal shelf on which all pages were made up. It was two-sided with a gap in the middle for the bogey, and
it's not a hangover from lithography, is it? Obviously, the lithography
was originally made of stone.
Yeah, so printing.
The stone was originally made of stone.
Yeah.
But stone tends to wear, whereas you can more easily replace. It was really quite hardened steel that we worked upon.
And actually, going back to what the conversations I've had with Glenn Fleischman about flong in particular, of course, it's quite rare to find flong these days because it was paper, so it was just immediately recycled.
It was.
In the same ways, obviously, as newspapers are produced from DC Thomson now, the aluminium sheets that the 4 individual plates per page are produced, they're just immediately recycled. And aluminium is, of course, infinitely recyclable.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, so
lead was not.
No.
Lead, we used to do what we called the discs, which was you'd take all the lead out and chuck it into what was effectively a large bin, and one of the stereo guys had to shovel that up and pour it to remake ingots, and they had to scrape the scum off the top because that would...
The impurities?
Yeah.
So
sometimes that worked well, sometimes it didn't.
The editor signs off the pages.
Yep.
and you're then going from. It's the process it's in the gap between those pages coming from the compositing room down to the presses. That's when you're producing the final late breaking news slug.
Although usually there would be a breathing space of 10 minutes, and then we would decide this is what we're going to use. Now that could be manipulated at times. If we didn't have something that was good stop press, you could put in 2 or 3 paragraphs of quotes which would say see page such and such, and we would put extra quotes just to give a little bit more value to the reader. Racing results always went in, but we would hope to have genuine late news, car crash, stock market fall or rise, or something that was genuinely going in there. When I worked on an evening paper, when all the football was in the afternoon, we called it the Sporting Post, there would often be sort of late results if a game had gone on for even just 10 minutes too long because of an injury or something. That was too long. Our margins were so tight that 10 minutes, it would go in the sporting section of the stop press. But it was in our interest to always get the result of a football match in, because with no other way to find the results, if we didn't say, and you'd miss the radio bulletin or the TV bulletin, you needed that in the paper. So
I've just got one more question, and I might regret asking it because it might be quite complicated, but the thing I still haven't got my head around is you have a cylinder, a drum, with the metal form of the complete page in a single colour wrapped around it. You have a hole cut in that with the late breaking news inserted into it. Mm-hmm. I can't understand how that's printed in a different colour. Because if the drum is rotating continuously in this direction, and it's being inked along its whole width as it has to be, because there's nothing underneath the red section, how do you get the red section?
There's usually,
and don't move away from your microphone, Steve.
There's usually 8 pages on a drum, but the ink rolling roller would be maybe 2 inches narrower than the drum that was rotating. Yep. And the stop press page, the stop press part of the plate would be the bit that's not inked. So there is a smaller roller that's dipping itself into red ink. I think it was done and then transferred from sponge to the actual roller. And it only does ink for one side of the paper. Now often this would have been misaligned, and you can often see
that's why there's quite a wide margin of error around the area, as you can see in the example.
So it's in the margin.
It's in the margin, so only the red roller, which is usually
Connie's joining in the conversation there from behind the microphone.
Connie understands the hot metal printing process much better than I.
No, I just
but yeah, to be honest, that's never occurred to me to be in any way complicated before, but when you try and visualize and explain,
there's no black ink around it.
No,
there's only black ink sort of below it, if you like, on the page, because that's in effect the margin.
Okay, depending on what sort of press you've got. Yeah. The Meadowside press was different to the Bank Street press. The Meadowside press would sometimes put the paper around another roller, which didn't print at all apart from the red.
Okay. So that
took longer though.
You're doing a two phase.
Two pass.
Yeah. And in the case of the newspapers, on the Meadowside press, it's printing both sides at once? So
yes,
both, so the paper's going through once, and there's a roller either side of that.
Yeah.
Pressing on it.
Yes, we still have video footage of that very press, I believe, and when they started it up, it was like a light aircraft in the basement, and the whole building would shake. In fact, I know that this building has springs between some of the girders to alleviate the vibrations of the press.
That could be why it does. As Connie said, you won't be able to hear, but the building does slightly shake when a bus goes past. But it's been constructed in such a way as it allows for that kind of vibration. Because these presses are, immense industrial machines. Anyway,
huge.
Thank you so much, Steve. I just wanted to take this opportunity, as we're in the middle of recording some more episodes of Pass It On, to dig out some more information on that particular wee thing that we saw, and that really fascinated me as a enthusiast for printing technology, and I know that Glenn will really have enjoyed it as well. So do check out the Pass It On podcast. You can find it by searching for Pass It On Tips on any of your podcast app of choice, and we'll see you there.
Cheers.